Hello everyone, my name is Brittany Nichols, and this is my Inquiry Project Findings and Implications digital presentation. I chose to do it over distance in interpersonal communication ethics in the film 1,000 Words. So distance in interpersonal communication can cause challenges in relationships. Interpersonal communication ethics may require different communication skills in relationships. According to Arnett, Hardin, Fritz, and Bell, interpersonal communication ethics differentiates itself from other forms of communication ethics by attentive concern for the relationship between persons. So the lack of interpersonal communication ethics may lead to the relationship's end or to some kind of change in one or both partners in which they change to behave more ethically to save the relationship. Findings in the film 1,000 Words. So in this fictional film, Jack McCall is unable to speak to his wife Caroline because of a tree that loses its leaves every time he goes to speak. The tree begins to grow in their backyard, and Jack notices that each time he goes to communicate with anyone that a leaf falls off of the tree. Troubled by this, Jack contacts his therapist, which his name is Dr. Sinja, and he contacts him about the tree because he thinks that Dr. Sinja has answers, and he hopes that Dr. Sinja can stop the leaves from falling. So as the tree continues to grow and leaves continue to fall, Jack McCall decides to go meet with his mother, who has Alzheimer's disease, and she keeps mistakenly calling Jack by his father's name instead of his actual name. So being reminded of his father makes Jack realize that he is angry at his father for abandoning him as a child. It is at that moment that Jack realizes his life is being held hostage until he forgives his father. So Jack's inability to communicate with his wife puts a bearing on their relationship. Jack uses nonverbal cues. Also, he uses charades with his wife, his co-workers, and boss. Also, when he goes to the local Starbucks. Jack decides to go to the cemetery where his father is buried, and he forgives his deceased father for being absent during his childhood. After forgiving his father, Jack communicates with his wife Caroline, and the relationship begins to work out after all. Discussion. So Jack's inability to communicate causes serious damage to his relationships. Jack tries to distance himself from his wife as well as his co-workers so that he doesn't have to communicate verbally with any of them. Interpersonal responsibility becomes an issue in the way that Jack interacts with his coworkers. His boss and coworkers are not anticipating the nonverbal cues and the nods that he has given them during a meeting. Another concept that appears in the film 1,000 Words is the particular matters. At first, Jack McCall's therapist, Dr. Sinja, calls him Mr. McCall. Then towards the end, Dr. Sinja calls him Jack. That's because they start to have a relationship. Another communication concept is highs and the shadows of demand. This was caused by Jack McCall's nonverbal communication cues with his wife, Caroline McCall, until he forgives his father towards the end. Lastly, we have interpersonal skills. It's demonstrated in the film when Jack and Caroline McCall have consistent communication in their marital relationship before the tree appears in their backyard. So distance in a couple's relationship can be harmful if both parties are not fully invested in the relationship. According to our text, Arnett, Fritz, and Bell write, "Distance permits us to see the details more clearly. The particular matters so much that one must honor distance, permitting one to see with clarity." As Martin Buber warned, beware of the person who overruns reality. Overrunning reality means attempting to be closer than time, interaction, and interest have yet made possible. The point Buber makes is that one way to communicate ethically in relationships is to allow distance, which gives the other a chance to say what's on his or her mind. Many times, we think we already know what's on the other individual's mind when really we're wrong. We don't know what's on their mind. So the film 1,000 Words exemplifies distance in communication and the problems that follow. The interpersonal communication ethics concepts I found in the film 1,000 Words were distance, interpersonal responsibility, the particular matters, highs and the shadow of demand, and the limits of interpersonal skills. Distance. So distance can be good and bad, but in the film, distance is bad. It's bad for the marriage. It's bad for Jack's job. Also, Jack tries to distance himself from his wife by not having to speak to her in their home. Interpersonal communication from an ethical standpoint is not about saying the right thing or looking as if one has all the ideas worked out. It is simply about not losing sight of a key ingredient, my relational responsibility to the other. Interpersonal responsibility. So even though the movie does not show interpersonal communication ethics in some scenes, that is because Jack McCall has lost sight of all his relational responsibility in the film. The particular matters. This concept appears when Jack's therapist, Dr. Sinja, calls him Mr. McCall. Then towards the end, Dr. Sinja calls him by his first name, which is Jack. According to our text, this usage illustrates how the proper name begins with a general reminder of a relationship played out in the particular between persons. Highs in the shadows of demand. Jack articulated nonverbal communication cues with his wife Caroline until he forgives his father later on in the film. Also, according to our text, a demand, however, cannot sustain an interpersonal relationship long term. Eventually, and sooner rather than later, the concern for relationship development must return once again to highest status. The limits of interpersonal skills. According to Arnett, Fritz, and Bell, the guiding key is the relationship which works as a beacon calling forth our responsibility to the other. So even though Jack was not communicating with his wife Caroline, he'd not been communicating with her because of his own father's distance. He was taught by his father distance, and he didn't even realize it. Jack also didn't have the chance to forgive his father while he was alive. Recommendations. So recommendations for the film 1,000 Words, I came up with Jack should have remained mindful and practiced communication ethics principles to avoid these types of issues. Also, if the marriage could not have been saved in the end, I would have recommended utilizing interpersonal communication ethics. Distance can be good if it is used at the right time in a relationship. Distance can provide positive results in a relationship because distance is the interpersonal space that nourishes the very thing that keep persons together interpersonally, relationship. Also, in the film 1,000 Words, distance was presented by Jack since he did not communicate with Caroline until the very end of the movie, after he has forgiven his own father's distance. Jack and Caroline will build their relationship using these ethical practices by understanding the concepts of interpersonal communication. Applying these recommendations to their interpersonal communication ethics of distance and theory points to a dialogic ethic in interpersonal communication would be very beneficial for their marriage. Implications.